Coogs house. A Boilermaker is someone who turns copper, iron, steel into a container to hold hot liquids and gases, but I don't think Purdue's going to be able to stand the heat.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, a podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came us by, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Please make your first listen each and every day, even as you listen to a short, condensed version of Locked On Cougars. Got more coming out with Big 12 squad and stuff like that. But in today's show, I want to make sure I get to you a little bit to talk some about my observations thus far on Purdue. I do have experts scheduled to come in and talk with them throughout the week, as well as Houston heads to the Sweet 16 to play those Purdue Boilermakers just 70 miles from Purdue's campus in Indianapolis on Friday night, late at night. So I want to talk first about those Purdue Boilermakers and who they are. I then want to make sure we take a moment to talk about like the idea of this being a technically neutral site, but not at all neutral kind of game, and what to think of Houston in that situation. But Houston plays Purdue. Purdue is 24-11. Matt Painter's been there for quite a minute now. National championship game a year ago, but I look a lot different without Zach Edey, who is now in the NBA. Player of the year in the NCAA last year. I probably would have taken Jamal myself, but Zach Edey did win that award. They got, in my opinion, the best point guard as far as consistency goes in America in Braden Smith this year. The 6-foot junior is averaging 8.5 assists a game, 16 points per game, is a floor general, really like his game a lot. He also, for its worth, is a pretty decent defender, given that he's 6 feet tall. I say that to say that, like, while he is going to have a size disadvantage in this one, Braden Smith's not the kind of guy that's like going to be intimidated defensively by what Houston's doing. He's getting over 2 steals a game, right? He's forced a bunch of other turnovers too, with like just disruptive play that doesn't really show up on a stat sheet. The other guy you got to watch out for with Purdue is Trey Kaufman-Renn, the big guy, 6'9". He listed at 230, at base closer to 240. Again, 20 points and 6.5 rebounds per contest. He's just a big bully inside, shoots really high percentage because his shots are really close to the rim, benefits a lot from the great passing of Braden Smith, but also kind of style that Purdue is playing this year, really kind of filling that Zach Edey interior role in a lot of what they're doing. And then those two, and then the third guy, Fletcher Lawyer, who's shooting 45% from three, and about 13.5 points per game. Those three guys really don't come off the floor for Purdue, and a lot of their identity gets tied up in those three guys. I thought it was interesting, though, when looking at Purdue's lineup. I think of Purdue as being really big, Big Ten, power, muscly around kind of program, and they have been that somewhat in the past. In this year's iteration of Purdue, they actually kind of line up with Houston, where like Houston might be able to outsize this team. Braden Smith is, again, 6 feet tall. Lawyer is 6'5". They start another guard that is 6'3". His name is C.J. Cox. And then they also start, like I said, I mentioned Trey Kaufman, who is 6'9". And then I'm trying to make sure I get this last name correct here as far as who the starter is. Caleb First, F-U-R-S-T, First. Caleb First is, I guess, technically the power forward. He's 6'6". One place has him at 6'7". He's more of a perimeter guy as well. So suddenly looking at a team that Houston matches up with size-wise pretty well. It's probably one of the only handful of times that you've ever seen that for Houston. Further, it's a team that also wants to play a very slow pace, a lot like Houston. Houston is like 350th in pace of play, meaning possessions per game. Purdue is sitting at 299th, so not quite as slow as Houston is, but just, in the same kind of category. They also are 9th in three-point percentage this season. They shoot 38.5% per game, 38.5% from three per game. Houston is first in three-point percentage this season at 39.8% per game. So in a lot of ways, a look-alike in some of those categories. I think the big deal here is going to be who kind of dictates the intensity and physicality of the game. Trey Kaufman-Renn is going to be down around the rim. Do a great job with him of playing 4 out, 1 in, and using angles and his bluntly wide body and strength to seal off and cut off things, to create good entry pass and good entry lanes. It's one of the ways that Braden Smith will get the ball to him, get some of those assists that we're talking about. Braden Smith will also do high pick and roll actions with other guys that you have to respect on the pick and pop actions. And from there, he'll get downhill and have drop-off opportunities in 2-on-1 kind of situations with big guys to get to Kaufman-Renn. The other thing I'll point out is that of guys that are shooting over 2 threes per game, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4 guys shooting 38% or better from out behind the arc. Pretty impressive to look at. Smith himself shooting 38.5% on over 6 attempts per game. Fletcher Lawyer, I mentioned 45% from 3 at just over 4.5 attempts per game. So those two guys can really, really shoot. And I think that's also dictating how they get those entry passes in a 4 out, 1 in scenario, because they're taking advantage of the fact that you can't just leave the big guy backside help and all that kind of stuff to come double him. Taking advantage of that. You can't leave to go help the big guy, I should say, and come from the backside to help out. CJ Cox is the other guy I mentioned as far as their starting lineup goes that shoots decent amount of threes, almost 2.5 threes per game, shooting 40% on those. All these guys, exception of Braden Smith, are a lot of catch and shoot, swing and rotation kind of three-point shooters. Purdue does pretty solid in terms of their assists per game. They're over half of their field goals, I should say, are on assists, meaning that they're moving the ball around and catch and shoot, catch and score kind of situations. Not a lot of ISO ball is what that means. You see it in the way they work this 4 out, 1 in, which is impressive because so much 4 out, 1 in feels like it turns into James Harden ISO hero ball, right? Other things I think I noticed when I look at this team offensively is that they kind of feel like if they can't get the ball into Kaufman-Renn, they don't do a whole lot of scoring inside. Now, that hasn't happened a whole lot this season. They do have some impressive wins. They beat Alabama. They beat Ole Miss. They pulled off a bunch of Big Ten tournament wins. Or Big Ten regular season wins. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get as far in the Big Ten tournament. It did beat Michigan, did beat Rutgers a couple times. Rutgers has 2 guys that be drafted in the top 5 this year. So they've beaten good teams. They also lost some questionable ones. And then as far as common opponents go, Houston had an exhibition with A&M before the season opened. They lost A&M, so you can kind of watch that matchup. They also lost to Auburn by double digits, almost 20. And so you kind of see how physical games, Auburn, A&M, Michigan State, right, they really can kind of push Purdue around some because Purdue is not very big, right? The deal will be as if that pushing and shoving at the level of physicality is a good thing for Houston or if it's a whistled thing for Houston. Sampson's been upfront loud about how Houston will foul you, and they're not really apologetic about it. So what does that mean happens, down the stretch here? I will say in looking at this that I think Houston wins, and I think it's going to be a tough game to play. We'll talk about the road aspect of this game in a second, but Kim Pom has the game as a 7-point win for Houston, which would actually be a bigger margin of victory than they had against Gonzaga in the round of 32. I think the big difference here is that Houston's going to do their darndest to make sure that Kaufman-Renn does not get the ball in isolation position in the post. They're going to recover out to threes with the X-out, cross-outs on the back, and they're going to try to force someone else to beat them off the bounce, not in catch-and-shoot situations. We've seen Houston do that to a number of teams this year. I want to kind of think through that thought process as well as talk about this game ultimately as a road game in just a second. But first, today's show is brought to you by Supply House. Now, listen, it's trying to get the supplies you need for the site made from your different skilled trades, your HVACs, plumbing, electrical work, all those kind of things are great to work with. Supply House to fulfill your needs, or easy-to-use websites packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to get you the job done right. Plus, the complete inventory of over 200,000 parts and over 400 plus top brands. You can get exactly what you need, deliverable fast from coast to coast. You have an order. They got expert support and industry-leading service. You always talk to a real person to help with that. Their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like dedicated phone line, free shipping, all kinds of things on discounts. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM. Start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. SH5 is the promo code. Parker Rangers locked on Coogs here. Thought process finishing up here before we jump into this idea of this is a road game. With Houston having success and defensively stopping these kinds of teams that start with big guy inside scoring a lot of points and working their way out. Purdue's really good at this. So I don't mean to say they're like a great a team that like Houston's really happy to be playing. Obviously, it is a tough game in terms of opponent. When you think about, like, frankly, what Gonzaga did with EK inside, or what Arizona did at different points in that game. You could even go to like what Kansas tried to do with Hunter Dickinson at different points. Houston has seen teams play through the big to work for threes a lot. Purdue is just a team that's really good at it, but I think that Houston and the diversity of styles of play you see in the Big 12 offers really good insight as to how they're going to work with this. Now, Houston saw it a little bit at Tech as well in the first matchup while JT Toppin was tossed early. You saw Darian Williams involved in some of those same kinds of things. And Tech's second matchup with Houston, JT Toppin got the ball a lot down low and was working the ball out some to, obviously a little bit of a depleted roster outside for them at that point, but some of those outside guys as well. And then for what it's worth, Houston was up on Auburn late before that one went the wrong way. Auburn, Janai Broom, Petaway, I think offers an interesting look at how Houston handled that as well. Early in the season, kept that one close down to the final wire, and I don't think Purdue is as good as Auburn, especially as Auburn was early in the season. So what I imagine you see here is they'll use in on Braden Smith and say use your size and length to disrupt his drive from not helping you out, right? And I imagine they have different designs based on sets that Purdue is running, on where the help comes from, on which side of the floor, to make sure that they can still front post player, but have sort of a help side on the backside. Bluntly, this may be a game where you see a lot of Mylik Wilson, a lot of Terrance Arceneaux at that 4 spot to get some speed to recover from the help side to the outside. Again, Purdue plays 4 out, 1 in with a 6'6"-ish guy as their 4th guy. Houston can play with that with Mylik and Terrance in that 4 spot a lot. We talked a lot this year about how Houston and small ball is going to be a really, really big factor moving forward. And so I think that that's kind of the direction I see this game going. I don't think Houston wins by like a lot. I don't think this is a big blowout-y kind of win. Purdue is a team that is very, very good. Again, they went 24-11 this season, 13-7 in Big Ten play. That is nothing to snuff at. It's a top 25 team as of the most recent AP polls, I believe. And they were definitely 22nd the last time I saw an AP poll. I think that was the most recent AP poll as of the recording of this podcast. And I think that this is going to be an interesting test for Houston. It's a dramatically different team than the other 2 teams on the other side of the bracket, both Tennessee and Kentucky. Tennessee is your classic branded-out defensive team. Kentucky, we know what Pope likes to do from his time at BYU, and he's got some blending of that with his current roster, obviously. So you got a lot of different things going on in this Midwest regional. But I do think Purdue shapes up as an opponent that Houston will have challenges with, but it's not like no team in America, I think they're insurmountable challenges for Houston, if we're being really, really blunt. And so I think that's kind of where I'm sitting on this one. Now, things that Houston has to be aware of is, of course, because it's Houston, you got to make sure that people stay healthy. You got to make sure that people stay on the floor. What you could also see is something like, I don't know, say you shut down everything and say, if CJ Cox has to beat us if they're going to beat us, right? He is, again, a 40% three-point shooter. Just doesn't shoot as many three-pointers per game as other guys on the Purdue Boilermakers. And as far as like his individual performances go, he can score some points. I'm trying to make sure I got my stats right here, but he has hit double figures a lot this season. Earlier this conference play, he had over 20 against Nebraska, right? So, like, it could be the kind of thing like, hey, we're going to shut down Braden Smith, shut down Trey Kaufman-Renn, shut down Fletcher Lawyer. Somebody else has to beat you. Well, that guy can break 20 if you need him to. He also had 16 against Auburn in December. They put him early in the season. In December, sounds right. And that was, again, like a kind of game where Auburn's being hyper-physical with everyone else. He finds his way to his own 16 points in that one. Now, Auburn won that game. It didn't work for Purdue to go through him down the stretch there, but he can get hot in those kind of situations. And so I want to talk this week with an expert a little bit more detail about what ways he sees Purdue to have a path to victory against Houston. But I think it would take something like that as I look at this. Not anything impossible. Obviously, no game is impossible. It's March Madness. Everyone can lose every day, right? But I do think that there are a lot of things working in Houston's favor here. They'll have size and multiple guard spots. They're also a great shooting team. They're as physical as anyone that Purdue's seen all year. Hyper physical defense. Houston's got the best defense in America by multiple analytical measures. I think that we can trust the scheme to keep some of those backside threes from being something that really hits you, right? I do think that Kaufman-Renn is an interesting matchup, and that Houston hasn't seen a whole lot of guys like him. They saw Toppin. I think Kansas wanted to treat Dickinson like this, but across the board, it's, you get to Arizona, you're kind of like, well, what's Arizona bring that's kind of in the same vein? I guess Vasar gave you a little bit of trouble in one of the matchups. Toby Awaka maybe here and there, but not necessarily the same kinds of troubles. I don't know. I do think that early in the season when you saw Auburn right out the gate start the season, Janiyah Broome is like in the Pokemon evolution kind of version of this, right? Janiyah Broome is like the Charizard, and somewhere earlier in that, I guess you could argue that Kaufman-Renn is. Kaufman-Renn's probably not as good at creating his own shot as Janiyah Broome. I think that's kind of what we're looking at as far as where they're trying to get their production from and percentages kind of situation. So good team, beatable team, but a team that you got to really beat. They're not just going to hand you one. I want to talk about one aspect of that in just a second. Before we get too far down the road into that, today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you ever check your banking account, we all do it on our phones, right? We check your banking account, wonder where did all my money go, dining out, online shopping, entertainment, easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. At this point, if you don't have a personal CFO, there's no reason to not be using Monarch Money. It gives you full visibility, control of your finances, not just budgeting app, controls Financial Command Center, all your accounts, investments, spending goes all in one place. Managing money can start building wealth on top of it. All-in-one is a real big deal here to me. I got multiple accounts. I got teacher, coach, podcaster. All those different things are coming into one spot. All of that, instead of juggling a bunch of different things, can be used in just one app using Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off the first year.
The NCAA Tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA Tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Locked on Coogs, Parker Ainsworth here, looking at the earliest stages of this matchup for Houston and Purdue on Friday night in Indianapolis. And in Indianapolis kind of gets me to my final point here. Indianapolis, where they're playing this Sweet 16 game, is all of 70 miles from Purdue's campus. In fact, of the other three schools, in the Sweet 16 in this regional. The other 3 all have a 3-hour or less commute from their campus to Lucas Oil Stadium, right? And that's starkly different than the 1,000+ miles it takes to get from Houston to Indianapolis. Now, Lincoln Cougs doing some cool deals right now with like cash back if you spend money on getting to Cougs games. And I think it's something people are taking advantage of for sure. Check out like what Landon and those guys have been tweeting about if you're looking for that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's a great program. Some of your dollars go to the Cougs, like the players in NIL. Some of your dollars go to getting you back in your pocket. Some of the dollars get to getting you towards the game, right? I mean, that's win-win, right? But for those of us that maybe can't get to the game for whatever other reasons, right, as you look at this, okay, it's like that quickly becomes what is functionally a road game. It's less than 70 miles from campus to stadium for Purdue. They travel really well in that state and the Midwest. It's frankly a like big-time fan base in that region of the world. And so you're going to have a lot of fans that were already in Indianapolis that went to Purdue, that were either home for vacation or just that's where they lived for work after they graduated or whatever, right? And I know that Sampson has said as much throughout the deal. It's a little bit weird. I mean, just a couple years ago, we had to play in the round of 32, Auburn in Birmingham, right? It doesn't feel great to have to go for functional road games early in the tournament. And I've been telling myself that this is okay because, you know, theoretically, if you get to play Final Four this year that's in San Antonio and that's in your backyard, you get to kind of put the shoe on the other foot in that sense. But I think the one thing that's different to me is that you could have had Houston play out west where, it isn't quite as big a deal, or the 2 seed would also be coming theoretically because it would not have been a California school in San Francisco there. The 2 seed could have been coming from Tennessee, Florida, wherever, and meeting you out west. And now you're both traveling a long way away. Or someone in your like chalked Sweet 16 route would have hopefully had to do just as much traveling as you. Instead, Houston's the only one doing what feels like any traveling for this weekend's contests. And I think a lot of people are rightly pointing out that doesn't feel like a reward for winning a lot of regular season games and getting that 1 seed. Having to go then play road games in the tournament isn't great. I would point out, hear me out here, that Houston has been excellent on the road. Houston is undefeated on the road this season. They lost a pair of truly neutral site games in Las Vegas in overtime. They lost at a very weirdly split stadium at Toyota, which was not a home game in terms of how many tickets were sold to Houston fans. It was in the city of Houston, so there's a little bit of that back and forth, but there was also a 2-game slate and all of that, and so felt almost frankly like a tournament game. Auburn travels well too, for that's worth. They lost that game in regulation. They lost a game in Fertitta at home to a Texas Tech team that was on fire for half of a basketball game there. And that one was a 1-point loss in overtime. On the whole, Houston's done really well on the road. You also had the crazy close win at Kansas, the crazy close win at Central Florida. So I guess you could easily say that, okay, 2 baskets go differently. You could have 2 road losses, and that's fine. But 2 road losses in a season where you played 10 road games would still be 80% of your road games in the Big 12 Conference you came out on top of. You went to Arizona, you went to Texas Tech, you went to Baylor, and they hate you there. I think that's a really strong road team. And frankly, I think it's one of the benefits of playing in this conference, right? When we talk about Houston moving up into the Big 12, it's a little over 18 months ago at this point, right? These aren't road tests you've had in the American, certainly not in Conference USA before that, right? And so suddenly you're going into a game that is functionally a road game in the NCAA tournament in March Madness, and you don't feel super concerned. It is a little bit of a concern. I think most of the people are like, I don't want to go that far away to go to a game. But the concern, I think, is more so like, God, this is a drag, not like we've got no shot. This team and program have proven that they've got every opportunity in the world to get this done. And frankly, there's been a weird level, higher level of focus the further they get from home, it feels like. There's something about that crazy, loud environment, traveling with your team, being away from campus, away from families, etc., where you're like, it's just us, it's just together, right? Guys talk about that in successful programs all the time. You've heard at different points in the last couple of years, Houston folks have said that about the Cougs. I think that that's what you're seeing happen here, and I don't know that it's going to be a gigantic deal. I will say, on a truly neutral, like everyone's picking up and going to play somewhere overseas, kind of truly neutral floor kind of thing, I think Houston's got a pretty good regional. I think the difference is that Houston's functionally going to have 2 road games in the regional. That makes it exponentially harder, right? I saw some stat the other day that Houston's path would be like the most difficult path analytically because of the idea of having to play Gonzaga, Purdue, and the winner of Kentucky, Tennessee, plus SIUE as the opener. And to get the Final Four would have been the most challenging, especially if you add in, it was like if you had Duke in the Final Four and then Florida or Auburn in the final, that would be the most difficult championship in a handful of different analytical measures to ever win in terms of opponents. And I don't mean to say this in a way that besmirches any program. Again, I think Purdue is really good. We're going to hear about expert from them later this week. But that, to me, only validates the claims about Gonzaga being way better than your average 8 seed has ever been, right? Because that skews the data a lot in this instance when Gonzaga should really be like a 3 seed, right? You're going to have functionally played multiple teams that should be inside the top 4 seeds as opposed to just 1 or 2 to get to the Final Four, right? So I think that that's really what that speaks to me. Later this week, we got Purdue experts to come on and talk about the Boilermakers. I got a couple guys in the works from there, so we're going to see how the schedule will work out on that. That's why I haven't said which one it is. Transfer portal has opened. Hadn't heard any scuttlebutt on that with the Houston Cougar basketball program, but you never know. Football is in spring practice. If big things happen there, big things will happen here. Keyshawn Henderson coming through to visit campus. Cannot stress enough how great it is to see things about Keyshawn loving being a Houston Cougar, even if it's not for a year from now. Stanford just fired a football coach. So I'm kind of doing some digging on if that would actually have anything to do with the Houston Cougar football program or not. We'll do all those things at Locked On Cougs each and every day. So subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Cougs, Premier, the Locked On podcast. Now it's your team every day. Go Cougs.